Call the regular meeting to order. Public comment, non-agenda items, conflict of interest going around the horn. If you can start, be clockwise where I usually sit.
None. 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 None.
All right, I don't have any myself, so we'll go from there.
Is Mike? We don't have a crowd or mic, right? No.
Okay, we'll move on to the consent agenda. Before I entertain a motion for the consent agenda, Terry, you usually have a little update there that goes along with it. Anything you have from the financial reports?
Yeah, there's 3 items. It'll be action items, the mill rates, the ARPA report from our auditor. Matthew Koch with Homes Internal will be presenting those later. And then the audit contract for this fiscal year and the following 2 fiscal years as well. In addition, I just want to let the board know we missed the date for the past dues to the county. Historically, we've had about 15 to 20 accounts that we put on the county's tax roll for collection. I missed it this year, and so they'll go on and be collected by May of 2026. In the event that any of those properties sell, we'll get the money at closing. So we're not losing the money, it's just deferred for a little bit, and we will be charging late fees on those accounts until we turn them over to the counties. So sorry for that.
Okay, anything else, Terry?
Nope.
Any questions from the board? Then I'll entertain a motion on the consent agenda.
I'll make the motion. Second.
Okay. Second.
That was Peter.
Okay. Further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Great. All right. Move on to committee reports. Have an update, I believe, for the Northwest Energy Land Agreement. Today's a good day for that. But a lot of this is going to be wrapped up into the action or the business with Susan's opinion letter. But we can start off. Al, you want to share an update from Roy?
Yeah, the only thing I have that's new from Roy is that they will have surveyors on site tomorrow to find the corners, locate the corners of the parcel that we intend to give them and adjacent to their current substation. So we're making progress.
Okay. Anything else, Al?
No.
Okay. How about the Canyon Water and Sewer District?
Want to give that update? Sure.
We are all but done with the 360. And we have the main deliverable from that for you all that we want you to review is the disposal costs tech memo, where we look at all the other reuse and disposal opportunities besides the canyon. And the purpose for that work was to put a value on disposal in the canyon to be a part of the negotiations of what you would potentially pay the canyon to develop that reuse if and when they do. Aside from that, we're just kind of in a waiting game right now for land acquisition, right away easement negotiations. Once that dust settles a bit, we'll restart with final design of the lift stations, pipelines. WGM will lead design of the collection system in the canyon for those that are ready to connect from the get-go, which is obviously not everybody down there. So till then, we're just waiting. The subcommittee is talking about how to go and talk to landowners with BizRad and with representatives from the Canyon District. So that'll be the next month or two worth work.
Okay. Anything else?
And some.
All right.
Excuse me, Brian, will they come to us for an agreement, or how do we link up if they in fact go ahead with? They've got a district that they have to put in the infrastructure. How does that process work?
Yeah, eventually they'll come to you and I think with the canyon and work out what to go back to the voters with for the 1% to finance it. And you all will have to have some sort of agreement in there about the money. And I think ownership of the project, because, you know, currently the way it's going is you have two owners of two portions of what really is one project. That would be, I think, challenging to hire a contractor. And so we have some things to think through there. You all might want to think about forming like a joint powers authority with them to administer the project as one entity. But yes, I think the hottest button for BizRad, besides right of way and easements and land acquisition, is going back to the voters with an adjusted request for the 1%.
The voters in the Canyon District.
And the resort tax.
And the resort tax.
The resort, okay, okay.
Yeah, you know, the 12 million doesn't cut it for what's all that's needed. And believe everybody has momentum to go back to the voters and ask. But the language hasn't been written and figured out. I believe it has to be done by January.
On and about right. The resort tax is looking to go back to the voters beyond just this project for an expansion of the 1%. Jack, I'm not speaking for that, but that's where it seems like it's going. And so we need to know from this piece what those dollars will be so that that can be included in that larger request.
So you say the 1%, is that an additional 1%?
It's we've got the 3%, the initial 3% resort tax, and then the 1% add-on. That 1% needs to be modified to reflect what the dollars are now and what the goals are now.
So in addition to what we received for our plan, they work out funding the.
Yeah, there was $12 million identified for the project to get from the corner to our facility.
Is there enough in,
Price tax,
is
not
there enough
12
in that 1% for all of these projects?
Over time, there is.
There could be, but not without going back for voter approval, because what was identified in the first request now expands beyond the $12 million.
And BizRad needs to go back out to the voters anyway to extend their charter. I think it's.
Yeah. In 2032, their
Oh, it goes
their
back.
term ends on resort tax, and that's a natural aspect of resort tax. When I sat on the board,
Yeah.
we extended from, hard to believe now, but extended it from expiring in 2012 to way out there in 2032, which is never gonna go.
So it's an expansion of the projects within the 1% and the time.
In the dollar amount of those projects.
Yeah. And the time that would.
Yeah, 10% has to be tied to a specific project for the voters to approve.
Okay.
So it'd be extending that. Moving on from the $27 million you got from the 1% for the plant into that 12 million originally earmarked for the 2 lift stations and the pipelines to pay for all of your portion of the project, your portion in the Big Sky County Water and Sewer District. The Canyon infrastructure funding has to come from ARPA and the Canyon. Maybe BizRad, but that's not for us to, we don't have any control over that.
Okay. Thanks, Brian.
Okay,
John, we didn't misstate anything there, did we? No. Thanks. Figure you're here, I may as well make sure.
All right, is that it for Canyon?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Flatiron Committee, I think that's gonna be captured in old business unless Michael or Chris has anything to add or. Okay. All right, Compliance Committee?
Been working with Lone Mountain Land last month and putting together a pilot project for alternatives to salt softening. It's moving forward and got good cooperation with Lone Mountain Land and Nash Beats.
Okay. Policy and benefits.
We're still working on the policy. We're hoping to have something, together this next month. So we'll be able to move that forward. CIP, hoping, waiting to get an update on the rate, study that we're currently doing. So I'm hoping September, October, we'll have a meeting and start getting our CIP built for the next budget cycle.
All right. We'll move on to business action items. And this will take a vote. Terry, do you want to talk about the 2024 mill rates?
Yes, this is for the water project that we did, about 12 years ago now. And we still have, bonds outstanding through 2027. And the mill rate this year that we've calculated is 5.08, slightly higher than last year's. The taxable values actually went down this year due to a number of factors. One being there were thousands of tax appeals this year with the increase in the taxable values that people received. And as a result, those were all adjusted. And so we've got a slightly higher mill rate this year than last year. But again, it's still a small piece of the pie of their tax bill. So we've got two payments, one in January of 2025 and one in July of 2025, which these mill rates will pay for.
Okay. Any questions from the board?
The decrease in taxable value really upset or surprised a lot of people.
Yeah, I received, yeah, I got a letter from the Department of Revenue on it, as they went through and detailed exactly what transpired, and they're still actually working on some of the numbers on that. It was quite an overwhelming experience for the DOR to have that many appeals this past year, so congratulations to them to get those taxable values out in time for this cutoff that we had with the counties to get these to the counties for them to collect.
And Terry, I just want to clarify, I believe I have this understanding correct, but we're gonna put this to the counties, they're gonna assess.
Yeah.
But we only receive the money as it's collected from the tax.
Right.
So, for example, those delinquent accounts we talked about a little while ago, if those would have tax levies on them or assessments on them, we don't collect the county doesn't collect the money, we don't get the money,
Right.
we have to fund that portion ourselves.
Right.
Until we get it later.
And the bulk of the money comes in December and
And then
June, yeah.
thank you.
Okay. Any other questions for Terry? How about a motion then? To approve the 2024 mill rates?
So moved.
Okay, second?
Second,
Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Oppose? Motion carried unanimously. Okay. Terry, you're up on a lot of items there. Annual audit?
As the 2023-2024 audit contract, as well as the 24-25 and 25-26 audit contract. Matt Cope, our auditor from Holmes and Turner, is on the line, and he can present those contracts to the board. Matt?
Yes, good morning. Thanks for having me. I told Terry whenever we pulled together the budget for these next 3 years, I went back and looked at the prior 3 years to kind of see where we were falling as far as time and cost, and realized that we were only realizing about 60% of the time that we put in. So we've been eating a lot of the cost over the last 3 years. So I called Terry and let him know that we were going to be raising the price, but I was going to do it in a 3-year increment to get it up to where I'm budgeting it at, where I think the fair market value is for this service. So the way that the proposal for the contract worked is that it's 12.5 for the 2024 audit. Then it goes up another 2,000 for the 14.5 for the 2025 audit, and then 16.5 for the 26 audit. Obviously you can go out to bid, but we would need to know for the 2024 audit, since we are not under contract yet for this current fiscal year.
We don't have that. That would have been our packet. It wasn't.
It should have been.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was in there. Well, going back through the history of the costs on our audits, 17-18, we paid $10,750, 18-19, $8,000, 19-20, $8,250, 2021, $11,250, and then the last 2 years, Holmes and Turner did not have any extra additional charges that we incurred, and I thank Matt for that. And the numbers that he's presenting in this audit contract, I believe, are fair and equitable to the district. I think they've been fair and kept their charges well under what they should have been through the years, and with the inflation and the changes in the market over the last 4 years, I'm surprised we can get in at this level. The costs, I mean, the engineering costs that we pay, the legal fees that we pay, the professional fees that are out there right now have escalated through the last 4 years. And I support this contract that Matt's brought to the board, and would hope that the board would support it as well.
Gary, how many years has Holmes and Turner been our auditor?
They've done the last 5 years.
Okay. And who did it prior to Holmes and Turner?
Junkmeyer and Campbell, yeah. And the last set of bids that we received ranged from 8,250 to about 13,000. And that was back in.
When they took over?
Yeah, yeah. So again, I think the fees that are in this audit contract that Matt's presented to the board are fair.
Okay. Any other questions from the board? I'll entertain a motion to approve the contract.
Make a motion to approve the contract.
Okay. Second?
Is that the contract?
That's the ARPA report there.
The contract, that's, I'm struggling to find it.
Yeah,
Could be underlined.
yeah, it's here.
Okay, I didn't see that in there. So we're approving the 3-year.
Yeah.
Just want to make sure I understood what we were meaning I should approve. We have a motion in a second, right?
Yeah.
I don't have any other questions.
Okay. Did you say you wanted to call the question now?
Yes.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Oppose? Motion carried unanimously, I guess. A little garbled.
And then the last, or the second to last action item is the ARPA report. And that's for the funding that we received from ARPA. We received a $2 million ARPA grant, and we're required to have our auditors review what we did with it and that we were in compliance with all the rules and regulations with it. And with that, I'll give it to Matt.
Yes, so a little different than an audit. This is an examination under a different set of standards. So you will see an opinion, but it's not a financial statement opinion. There's no schedule presented with this report. So to keep the cost down, we went the alternative route that the Office of Management and Budget allowed. And what that entailed was just an examination with the specified requirements, which in this case were 2 direct and material compliance requirements that they issue every year. And that's cost allowed, unallowed, and allowable activities. And during our review of the cost, we actually tested 100% of the population because it was all related to the construction costs. And we found no issues of non-compliance. So in our opinion, it's a little small paragraph right above the other reporting required by governmental auditing standards. It just says that, in our opinion, the district complied in all material respects with the specified requirements for the year ending June 30, 2023. So this is a clean report. We will file this with the Department of Treasury and yeah. Any questions?
I guess my only question is, what's the action we take on this?
You just accept the report.
I'll make a motion to accept the report.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Oppose? Okay, motion carried unanimously. This one's a little more complex. We have 2 parts. We have the tolling agreement, and we have Susan's opinion letter on that. And I'm assuming Susan is there?
Yes, I am, Brian.
Here's a role reversal. You're there and I'm not. So maybe you could give
I'm taking it personally.
maybe an introduction on this and give a summary to start off.
I don't know that we need to even really work through the opinion on the Spanish Peaks annexation at this point. What you have in your packet is a tolling agreement that we've been working on for a year, more or less. Under I call it the YC agreement, the 2000 YC agreement. That's not the name of it, but that's what I refer to it. There's a portion of that in which the developers are supposed to build another storage pond. And in the 20 years that has passed since we have been administering this agreement with the developers, we have developed snowmaking. And DEQ is starting to permit snowmaking, and there are, at least this far, I think that it's been all positive for what snowmaking does for our storage issues, for other infrastructure that may or may not, might be less, let's put it this way, from a lawyer standpoint, it's less invasive, thus less liability than having large storage ponds. So the concept came forward that for its Yellowstone Mountain Club, Yellowstone Development, and CHSP acquisitions, that instead of them proceeding with building the storage that they're obligated to build, is that we would have a tolling agreement, and we will so we're going to hold it in abeyance that they are obligated to build that tolling, because we think there's potential for snowmaking to be a better alternative with less liability all the way around. So then I have negotiated with Johnny and some help from Ron the terms of the tolling agreement, but there's only one, I guess, decision for the board to make, is that I think the one in your packet has in the last paragraph on page 1 that that they would monitor and monitor and report snowmaking storage for 5 years. And the developers, it's primarily CHSP who we've been working with, would prefer that to be 3 years. We've gone back and forth twice. So at my level, we can't reach an agreement. I put my thoughts into why I thought 5 years was a good choice, and I don't know if that got conveyed to the board. But
Yeah, your summary was in the in the narrative, and I did talk to Rich. They're okay with 5. As we explained, anytime in the next 5 years, we can execute storage if we need to. Permits, a lot of things could happen with those developments, so.
I mean, I don't think snowmaking permits are going away, but they're on a 5-year increment, and the way the timing of the first round of permits ends, it would end a year before the 3 years, and that makes me nervous because a year isn't very long to do anything. In all honesty, when you're talking about volumes of snowmaking or storage at this size. So that's why I chose 5, and I guess they're okay. And so I don't know if you guys have any questions about this, but that's the overview of what we're achieving, which is we're essentially saying, don't build your storage for now. We're going to monitor and see how snowmaking works out. We're going to make sure DEQ stays solid on issuing those permits. And then we'll go back to, in 5 years, we'll come back and we'll still be here, Al. We'll come back to any kind of resolution on that portion of the agreement.
Okay,
In reading through it, the only thing I was wondering as I went down, you covered the last one,
The last line of
last paragraph.
the last paragraph.
That's the only questions I had as I read through it, and you satisfied me with it.
Okay, thanks.
Can you help me wrap my head around, we've always referred to the 160 million gallons, but then the beginning of this refers to 130 million gallons. And I'm struggling to reconcile, when we conclude, it's back to it concludes at the 160. So am I missing something there, or is that?
They've already created storage for 130.
That's that gallon, okay. And then I'll say it, I guess I'm the spell check guy.
Did you find one? Good for you, then you know I'm doing my own work.
I mean, he's pretty smart, but we gotta quit referring to Brian as brain.
thank you.
He's starting to get a little.
Yeah, I have to tell you,
He's starting to get a little arrogant.
and I will tell you, that's Gina Sherman, but we're okay with that. We'll fix that.
It's not the only time, probably even in this package, that spell check doesn't catch that one. I guess, though, from what I'm hearing, if initially it sounded like the 3 to 5 was an issue we need to resolve, but you're telling us they're willing to accept 5 years.
Yeah, Rich was good, and he never got back with me that anything was different than the 5.
So then the term of the tolling agreement would be the 5 years.
5 years. That's my recommendation to the board, and obviously you can pass it and sign it, and they can edit it and come back to us if they like to.
Right.
Yeah, we got one permit going and another permit that is in the past. Yeah, so the one permit is already issued. We're 1 year into it and ready to go into the second.
Is that the one on YC? On the backside of that?
The YC permit has been approved, the Spanish Peaks permit is out for public comment, we can do something back in the next month or 2 on the actual permit being written.
Where will the YC be used, or the Spanish Peaks?
On, right now where our snowmaking is at, is on Spirit Mountain and the lower portion of Deep South in Southern Comfort. But the permit also allows us to expand that up into El Dorado and all of Deep South in the future. And one point of clarification, Al.
John, why don't you come up here so they can hear you?
One point of clarification, the 130 million gallons is the obligated storage, the 160 million gallons is the obligated disposal. So that's the difference between the 130 and the 160,
Okay,
if that makes sense.
that helps clear it up more. Oh, thank you.
We're gonna step back if you know anything else.
So do we have to, approve this?
Yes, please.
We need to take some action.
Or some action?
And just to clarify, well, this agreement isn't really making a decision on the major issue. It's, the issue was, at one point we said we need that additional storage, and now we're saying we can wait for these 5 years and evaluate how snowmaking is working and determine in 5 years, or if we choose to earlier, whether or not we're comfortable with that.
That's
We're
correct.
committing to a 5-year sort of deferral.
That's
Okay.
correct.
Okay. All right. Entertain a motion then?
Make a motion to approve the towing agreement.
Okay.
How
How about a second?
I'll second.
Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
I vote aye. Motion carries unanimously.
Feels good to check that box, huh?
It's been around for a while. Nice to get that off the list.
1 year, exactly.
Yeah.
For lawyers.
This is Johnny's 1-year anniversary too today. Pretty close.
But we're not counting. 1 year is 1 year. It's been a fun run so far. Since we looked yesterday.
Here already.
Yeah.
Okay, old business. We'll go with Scott's monthly update. Capital improvements plan.
Yeah, the plant construction, continues to march towards, solid startup. Lot of, aerobic digester and equalization basin work in those old SBR basins and finishing up, phase 2, concrete this fall. Helping troubleshoot some fine screen motor issues, warranty stuff. Adam's got the plant running well. We've had a couple of hiccups just due to construction, challenges, running water back from pond 2 and getting, programming for all the blowers so he has enough air. Just typical construction challenges. Say that's accurate?
Yeah. How have we been doing since we adjusted the phase and the transformer for the power? No issues? Yep.
Last month, just continued the kind of open discussion of budget situation there for our construction administration. We're now at about $300,000, so Tyler and Zach Freeling and James Sletton have been tapering well, kind of in this lull before we start up solids. There'll be a lot of work this fall to get that up and going, so we would just prepped you all for an amendment request for an extension of construction administration budget. I think we're going to be fine for the main body of that contract. It's the post-warranty construction period, the next year that we would run out of budget. So Johnny and I'll sit down and work through that and see what we need to do. But it won't be much. Couple of tours this week and then really gearing up towards October 8th, Community Week and grand opening of the plant. Solids won't be fully up and running, but the liquids has been, and the facilities are habitable and usable, and so we'll have a nice ribbon cutting ceremony for Community Week.
The first Tuesday from 12 to 2. October 8th, yeah.
October 8th.
Good.
That's the ribbon cutting?
Yes.
Working on wrapping up your wastewater collection system hydraulic model so that will eventually support a wastewater master plan, collection system master plan.
reuse management plan, we've added the salinity reduction plan and that reuse disposal alternatives tech memo that I told you about a few minutes ago. We walked Johnny and Adam through that, but haven't released that to DEQ or legals or anybody, still holding that. Still draft, still need a final QA/QC before that's fully done. Reuse booster station PER, your RFQ has a due date of August 29th, so next Thursday?
Yeah.
You'll get proposals from us and maybe others to design that plant for groundbreaking in 2024. In the meantime, Adam needs to buy replacement pumps for YC1, which I think you're very close to pulling the trigger on.
We're super close, just working out final quote. Correct.
It will help you all get those installed later this fall. They'll be temporary, but he needs standby and backup and redundancy till we get Mid-Mountain online. And then the pumps that we put in there can be moved up to YC2 and used as backup for there. So just racing you for that more than anything. And working with John and the county to get the location for Mid-Mountain permitted and squared away. I'll give you an update on the canyon. I believe your staff will be pulled into those negotiations on right-of-way easements. Water master plan, Johnny and Jake have scope with Zach Magdal to get going on that. Our main goal there is to help you be ready with a capital improvements program list for spring and negotiations with BizRad and funding and impacts to your rate study and all the fun stuff.
And we should have an update next month from WGM for the water rights work that we're doing as well. That'll marry into the water master plan.
We're assisting Sanderson Stewart on your behalf with BizRad and the TIP TED effort. The Madison County portion, that report is being wrapped up, and then they'll switch to the Gallatin County portion next week, and we'll help them with infrastructure deficiency reports. That's basically describing all of your reuse activities and how much additional reuse capacity you'll eventually need for that effort that will go to the county commissioners for consideration. We submitted 2 deviation requests to DEQ 2 weeks ago. One for resetting your gallons per day per SFE to get away from that 107 gallons per day per SFE and back to a more standard average annual approach. Haven't heard anything from them yet, other than a request to pay the fees for the review process.
That one caught me off guard a little bit.
Yeah.
How many gallons per day is the request, Scott?
75 on an average annual basis.
Got it.
So just keep in mind that the 107.3 was DEQ saying that's your 2-month peak. We want to reset it to the way most people, which is your average annual, and then your staff and your engineers track the peaks separately to make sure that we have capacity. With that deviation request, we also put in a request to switch to E. coli monitoring down here in the village for reuse, just like we do up on Lone Mountain. Get away from total coliform, and ducks and geese can trigger those monitoring efforts. So we just want to monitor what really matters, which is pathogenic bacteria.
Scott, if over time that average goes above 75. What can be done at that point? Is there a reset? Do we shut off sewer flows?
You can reset and it's it fluctuates from year to year. 75 is slightly conservative. You've got data showing 71, 72 for the last 3 years. It's been a little drier than usual, but you've also hammered I&I, staff has. So you want credit for the I&I work that you're putting in, because that's money. But if you had, 2 or 3 wet years, huge occupancy up here because the skiing was great, or if you had another pandemic, or you got to watch all that. And if you need to reapply because it's 85 in 5 years, you can do that.
If we haven't busted it already.
Yeah, we're gonna monitor it every 3 years. The biggest thing, and it's been this way for years, is the industry average, we use 100. So anything below 100 is conservation. You're doing a really good job to bring down your usage, button up your I&I and stuff. So even with growth and stuff, 4 or 5% year over year, it's gonna be, incremental. So over the next 3 years, we'll watch flows and we'll see. But then you get into this spot where it's just a little bit back and forth. So it's really more time and effort to get a deviation change, unless it's significant like the one we're doing now. It's very significant. So, but as we keep buttoning up the system and watching the flows and then watching growth.
Yeah, most places in the country that are at 75 would be there because of extreme conservation and dry climate. You're there, you all are doing some good conservation work, but you're also there because of occupancy. Most of this area is not fully occupied. But you have, the plant capacity is at like 55%. So you have a lot of time to watch and see how things are going. Unless the canyon came on board and you did some annexations and infill went crazy inside of the district because of a pandemic or something, you're going to have 10 years to watch the plant, see how you're doing on that.
And then typically when the plant gets to 80% capacity, we start conversations of what the next steps are, because it gives you time to do all that stuff. So.
Our budgets are the water resource recovery facility construction contract, like I said, is at about 300 currently, and we have about 4 more months of construction period contract administration, and then we switch to the post warranty period. So I'll just watch that with you. Everything else is in good shape. Other than perhaps the district engineering services, we're sitting at about $30,000, and depending on what you have us do, we've been billing 20 to 30 on that per month, which is higher than we have been. I think in the next month, the biggest hit we're going to put on that would be helping Adam figure out how to get those pumps installed in YC1. There's going to have to be some replumbing and pipe fitting down there to make that happen, and probably wipe out concrete pads and level that floor and just do some things like that to make sure we can get those pumps in there.
Is that the pond?
That YC1.
Yeah, so what we did is we had gotten quotes for 2 pumps. We brought it back because the price just lead time was really long, so we opted to get 1. Then the vendor came at us with another alternative that is a shorter lead time, but we can actually get more pumps for the price. So we're looking at 2 skids, getting 1 now and 1 in the future. Am I correct? Or we're getting both?
My understanding is we're getting both 2.
So I actually have 4 pumps sitting down here at YC1 that we can get parts and pieces and stuff a lot faster. Repurpose the pumps that we have there. We canceled the purchase order on the 1 in exchange for these. we have a rebuild plus the two that's there, that would be redundancy for YC two. And then when YC 1.5 goes in, then we have pumps for that, correct? Or is it strictly all
YC 1.5 or mid-mountain is gonna drop the pressure big time on YC 1. So we have new pumps coming in with mid-mountain for YC 1. It'll be 300 PSI instead of 500. But all these pumps that we've been shuffling through YC 1 can be used someday at YC 2, as long as YC 2 also has some pipe fitting work done to accommodate any of them. But what's happening is, these had these exotic multi-stage horizontal centrifugals for 20 years that are really hard for Adam to get parts for. And they're very, very expensive pumps. They're kind of a special deal. Now you're switching to skidded boosters with 2 pumps on each skid. So you have boosting happening on each train. Why we have 4 pumps, 2 skids of 2 instead of just 2 pumps, but they're cheaper and easier to get parts and seals and things for.
Where's YC two?
Up in YC,
All the way up in.
all the way up. It's the booster that pumps it up to their pond. So YC 1 is the workhorse, and we want increased pumping reliability out of that.
So where will 1.5 be?
And Spanish Peaks, I don't know the road right off of Lucille Falls. So it's kind of almost a halfway point between the 2 pump stations. So
Real close to where the T is, that separates the Florida YC and then the.
Spanish.
So YC 1 and mid-mountain or 1.5, whatever we want to call it long-term, will have more normal, and still not normal, but 300 PSI kind of pressures. YC 2 will always have that 500 PSI kind of pressure to pump it straight into their pond.
Okay.
when this is all said and done, instead of it taking 365 days to get 160 million up the mountain, we can actually have some redundancy to have maintenance and downtime and stuff during the season, so we can actually what we're gonna add to it, 100, almost 100,000 total. We're doing 2 to 3 now, so 3 to 4. So we can, or down, we can actually move more water surprisingly with the lower pressures.
Once Spanish Peaks has their snow removal agreed to, where does it, how does that go? Does that go from the YC 1.5 or is it a whole separate deal to bring water up to there? They boost it once it's on, you know, we pump it into their ponds and they boost it from there. I don't know, do you need more of your own boosters to flush
Yeah,
out?
we'll have to, Jared, first to answer your question, the system's already in place to irrigating on the golf course. So the ponds are in place, the pumping station's in place, and the piping's in place. But yes, we will have to upgrade our pump station in order to bring additional water up in the center.
For clarification, YC1 sends to Spanish Peaks as well as Yellowstone. We have a diversion point up near Fish Camp that we split flow.
Thanks. That's all.
Susan, John, you're up.
I feel like we're a team today.
Susan's gonna give us an overview of this and we'll go from there.
So before you have a petition to annex, let's just call it Spanish Peaks land for ease. And this is where it ties in again to the 2000 YC agreement, which you have an obligation to provide them service. And they're asking for land to be annexed that would be utilizing some of that service. By statute on annexation, you have some broad language that directs you as to what you can do with a petition for annexation. You can receive a petition for annexation and you can send it out for a vote. However, if it is contiguous and you have adequate service to serve the lands in your district and excess capacity, you can also annex the land by resolution. And just because the law is complicated, even if you annex it by, well, you would pass an ordinance of resolution or an ordinance to annex, and your ordinance would be read once a week or one time at a meeting with 2 weeks in between, and has to be read twice, and then it doesn't become effective until 30 days after the second reading. But so if you can choose to do it by paper, you can decide that it's contiguous, which this land is contiguous. You can decide you have facility capacity, and then you can pass an ordinance and then read it twice. And even then, after that, once you read it and pass it, you could also choose to put it out for an election after you've already decided that you have capacity in the district and excess capacity. I went into, in my opinion letter, talked about exactly the deviation we talked about earlier, which was kind of, I'm glad that the timing has worked out. I know it's been really painful for Spanish Peaks, but the downward deviation to, what did I write down, 75? 75 as opposed to the 107.3, I think takes you right exactly into what we've always, which has always been, I'm going to say, the difficulty in working with the YC agreement. The YC agreement is a volume agreement. It's not an SFE agreement. But the district is used to contemplating projects in terms of SFEs, a projected average use. And that's so I included that in this discussion because I think it's important for you to be thinking about when you're talking about, do we have adequate capacity in the district? And then do we have access that could serve this property? I heard Scott say the plant is at 55%. Yeah. He's shaking his head yes. And so there's a lot in Montana law that's not been specified. So when you start talking about capacity and facility, lawyers have always contemplated that as treatment, disposal, and processing, right? That's how we think about it. I'm aware of a fight in northern Montana where they're arguing over line size and one line being an issue of capacity. I don't think that's true. I don't think that the courts are going to fall out in that line. I think they're going to say the question for you for capacity is, do you have adequate facilities? So on the last page of my opinion, I kind of walked through what I think you need to be thinking about while you're doing this is the land contiguous? I don't think there's any doubt that it is. Does the plant and disposal have capacity in excess of needs of the existing district that would allow these lands to be served? I think you can come to the conclusion, yes, you do, based on the information you have received today. You've got the downward deviation in place. It's going to be on an annual. If you wanted to do the math on SFEs, if you want to do it on volume, the answer is still yes. You are only at 55% plant capacity, so you should be able to. And there are engineers in the room will be happy to tell you that if you want to calculate the volume, you have excess capacity. One of those questions then becomes timing on that capacity. As Johnny said, when our plant gets to 80%, we're going to want to rethink about what are the next steps what do we do? What are the next steps? And so that was kind of led me to what I suggested to you, which is that we enter into, if you're in favor of this, and we're going to get back to process in a minute, but we enter into an annexation agreement. And what I would anticipate would be in the annexation agreement is a lot of what's in here in the letter, which is to say, we have this obligation, we have capacity, they're going to come in project by project. You're not coming in with all of it at once. No. Right. Right. So we will have time to be able to evaluate our capacity as this project grows. You can never forget, you do have a contractual obligation there, but you're gonna be able to evaluate what the impacts are for, capacity. And, and then there's money that's been sitting in a fund for, what is that, 17 years, 15 years? A long time. Terry's shaking his head. Yes, I'd like to throw that in the annexation agreement so we can get that off our books. We're holding it, and it came out of this whole agreement. It'd be nice to be able to close that out and have one less audit remark. And then I think that, I mean, they've always agreed that they would measure flow, and I think we would kind of call out a pretty specific system for flow. Meters, what those meters would be, what the monitoring is going to be. I would put those in an annexation agreement. So I would think that if you're going to go forward, which I'm going to anticipate you will go forward because you're going to meet the criteria of it's contiguous and you do have capacity, I would say that one of the things you would want us to do is you would direct staff to prepare a draft ordinance and work out an annexation agreement. The annexation agreement wouldn't include anything more than what I don't anticipate it would include any more than what I've just said. Then your next step as a board is to decide how you want to proceed. Do you want to pass an ordinance and then send it out for a vote? Or do you want to pass the ordinance and you'll do 2 readings, so you'll still get public comment on it for anything that comes forward, and exercise your power to annex under the authorities the statutes give you? Beyond that, I am happy to talk about sewer and the annexation. Yes.
I like your last sentence there, and then next to the last paragraph. I'm still trying to read.
Which sentence?
The short one in the third to the last paragraph. I suggest you direct staff
to work out with the applicant an annexation agreement that recognizes our contractual obligations under the YC contract, that addresses the variation and how we calculate SFEs and what that process is going on right now. And I bring that up because if you look at Exhibit F in the YC contract, and wasn't me, that's all I can say, is that Exhibit F actually says 1,000 SFEs, which is what creates at least what could be arguably a conflict in the contract. 1,000 SFEs at 250 gallons per day is very different than 1,000 SFEs at 75 gallons a day on the purpose of the volume, right? And so that I would like to be able to work that, at least call that out, acknowledge that we work in SFEs, the contract says SFEs, but the body of the contract is really clear, it's on volume. So while we do have that other caveat on the side, I would prefer not to argue about SFEs. I prefer to go on volume. That's a legal opinion. And then talk about the flow monitoring that exists, what additional monitoring we have, the reporting period, and the variation rate, which I think comes back to your question earlier about what we do if we get into this project is annexed and we get up to or close to their total volume. And we start to where everybody has concerns about going forward, or we get an upward deviation. I appreciate that Scott invoked the Lutheran repeat 3 times another pandemic. Thank you very much for that. Right, but that's why I want to put it in the annexation agreement, is it allows us that kind of flexibility, and they're agreeing to it up front to say, okay, we know we've got this left. Here's what we're working on, and we understand that things could change, and the average SFEs, which we're projecting every time we approve a project, could go up, and so we want to leave ourselves some lawyer terms is ish room. ISH. It's ish, right? It's 43 million ish, right? You don't mind that, do you? So that's what.
Rounded up. That's-
Right. Oh, ish goes both ways. So that's that sentence, a very long run-on sentence that says, that's what I'm asking you to do. After you decide what you're gonna do, whether you're gonna go forward with a straight election, or you're gonna direct this to go ahead and present an annexation ordinance, and you're gonna do it by ordinance. And I'm gonna ask you to make, if you go by the annexation by ordinance, I'm gonna ask you to make the second decision here and decide if even after you go off an annexation by ordinance, do you want to send it out for an election? And I haven't pursued the timing or the cost of the election, so,
That was my second question. We said we make a motion for an ordinance, or we develop an ordinance. We have it read twice. And then we could still decide to go in for a vote.
you need to decide that now, because we would need to write that in the ordinance.
Okay.
What, I'm trying to understand, what would be the reason for taking the approach of writing the ordinance, reading it twice, and then still going out for an election? Seems like if you're gonna do the election, you'd do the election, not.
Well, you and I are thinking logically,
Okay, so.
and that's not what's written in the law.
Try not to do that.
I don't know why. I don't know why you would take, I don't know why a board would say it's contiguous and we have capacity for everybody and we can move forward, and then they would go out for election. It seems to me if you were gonna go out for election, you just do that,
That's sort of.
right?
You could amend,
Use this option.
you could amend the ordinance during one of the readings.
And then you'd go back and you'd make sure you have two amendments of a finally unamended ordinance, right?
Two readings.
Two readings, yes, two readings, yes.
2 unedited readings.
Which has been done, just not frequently here. They still hear thunder?
Question for you. No, question for you. So what you're recommending is, election versus annexation by ordinance.
No, I'm not.
No. You're not making a recommendation either, but what I'm saying is, independent of which direction they go, the annexation agreement also includes all the parameters of everything else that we've talked about. So does that annexation agreement happen prior to this go? I mean, if the board elects to take this out for election, do all those parameters, is that negotiated prior to that going out to vote? That's question one. And question two, if the board elects to just annex based on the criteria that you've laid out, that annexation agreement, again, all the terms is part of that. So before anybody signs, those terms are all negotiated and part of that annexation agreement.
I would think that if the board decided and just said, put it out for election, then I don't think we would, I mean, we could negotiate an annexation agreement, but I
Why would
can't see why.
agree?
Right? But if we're gonna do it by ordinance and do the two readings, I think the annexation agreement and the ordinances come forward at the same time.
That makes sense.
So that the board can see, here's the agreement of what the terms are, and this is the ordinance, so that it becomes a contract that's contingent upon the annexation. And that is how it sits. If you, for some reason, they deny the ordinance, you wouldn't have an annexation agreement because it wouldn't have the effect, right?
Okay, makes sense.
So why you haven't annexed anything in a really long time?
I
You know-
have a question, and this is, and I'm sure this information was given to you by Johnny and Ron, but on page 3, you're showing that the properties are sending 23 million gallons per year. That's significantly higher than anything we've ever.
That's
talked
based
about.
off of your actual sewer flows that I've been tracking.
So
It's a projected year to date, because I only got 100 and, I don't know, whatever days are in it. So every time I update it, it's a projected annual total.
because the last time, the last committee meeting we had, the numbers that both, I believe Adam and I agreed on were close to 14.5 million, and that was for the year 2003. That didn't include any of the 2004 information.
So we have 2023 and we're tracking 2024 now. So that would have been your 2023 number at 14. Right now, you're tracking a projected annual flow of the 23. That's where you're at now.
Okay, so.
People are flushing more.
And that is checking with the second meter. It's within tolerance of the 2 meters, so we're pretty confident and we'll continue to track those flows coming through those flumes.
So 23 million out of a 46 million.
Correct.
Yeah.
What percent built out are you?
So as long as we're assuming that 23 million is correct, that's 54% of the volume of the agreement. Where we're at right now, there's 2 scenarios that I ran for Johnny and Ron yesterday. If we were to build out to our allowed ODP in Gallatin, Madison County, and MPUD in Gallatin County, we're at about 60%, 59 to 60% of development. Our current plans, we have significantly less density than what we're actually approved for. And if you take those numbers into consideration, we're closer to 66% of build out. So.
And then the other caveat of that, like with the major plant, their 80% market is at 34. So
Say
yeah,
that again.
they're 80% of their 42 is 34.
Oh,
So when they hit that flow at 34, we do a double check and make sure that we're still in line with the growth and stuff. But yeah, right now they're projected to be at 23. Of course, now we're at the end of August. I think that update was to the end of July. Been doing that quarterly.
I have one more question. for
Sure
Susan.
thing.
I'm trying to figure out how to frame this correctly, because I'm trying to break the issues separately to better understand it, but if the YC agreement was written more clearly, maybe so the parameters were solid. Let's say the SFEs could be relied on versus the flow. We take that issue out of it. And we're being asked to annex land without, in theory, then providing more capacity, because they already have the right to some capacity. So that's where this is a little bit of a unique annexation. The way I see it is they're not, we have to resolve that because it's unclear. But if it had been clearer, they'd be saying, we want more land to spread out what you're already obligated to provide us.
Right, yeah, I mean, the other option would be is that they could come in and say, okay, we're gonna, and I don't like this word, but apparently it's now a word, densify what we have already in the district,
Yeah.
right? And you would have to say yes, because you have this obligation. So that's the other side of this, which is the fact that they're seeking to add land to utilize the same volume. It is exactly what you're saying, is that the volume is the volume.
Yeah.
And what we're saying is, sure, we'll agree, we can spread that volume out over more land.
And the reason I'm bringing that up for my own, I want to clarify for my own mind, is when we're talking about how we approach this annexation, even though it's not necessarily written in the law, which you've identified clearly, if the parameters of the law are met, to me, that is kind of a consideration as well as to what approach to take.
But I mean, and my short answer would always be, you have the obligation now. Where it applies is going to be up to you, and a process for up to you, but you have that obligation. And you've been well aware of it. It's no surprise.
I just wanted to make sure I was thinking that correctly.
Yep.
So if it's approved, how would we go about approvals of future subdivisions down the road? If it's, right now we're kind of doing it off of SFEs, and if 107 is kind of the number, if this variance to 75 is approved, we go back to approving them at SFEs.
The process isn't going to change, right? So if you annex this land, you still have that obligation. They're going to come in with a project and they're going to say, we're going to use 100 SFEs. And depending on where we're at, it'll be 100 SFEs calculated at 107.3 if they did it tomorrow, or it'd be 100 SFEs calculated at 75. Right.
So we're just taking a theoretical 1,000 or whatever the number is to 1,800 or whatever that number ends up being. We're basing our decisions off of that.
Right.
Okay.
So under your recommendation, we would never completely convert this to an SFE agreement. We would just, the SFE number would be a moving target based on volume projections.
Right, and the argument I anticipate will be that, I mean, because it's a volume, right? So I think if we stay at the volume, it avoids the argument of, well, you've already used 69 SFEs or 102 SFEs or whatever it is. It's still our process to permit because we have to estimate the volume that's gonna hit our plant. But I don't think we have to argue, well, you've hit your 1,000, right?
Yeah.
And that was part of what I'd like to clear up in the annexation agreement is that while it does say on Exhibit F that it says 1,900 SFEs, but that's 1,000 roughly for this. But while that was a shortcut on the top of an exhibit, I think the more persuasive language in the agreement is the 43 million.
So the annexation, like this, whatever was negotiated, next step, if we approve that approach, we'll address that.
Right.
Yeah, fair.
But we would be using the 75 until we reached the full 1,000 SFEs.
Well, we're gonna use the 75 until and we're gonna keep calculating and we're gonna have, my anticipation of the annexation agreement is, and because we're getting daily flows, we're gonna set incremental periods so that everybody can be updated and so that we can say, okay, well, now they're at 30 million, right? You know, and we have a lot more data than we used to have. So.
Then we'd have to go into DEQ and get a change in the 75.
No,
There's nothing about this that would trigger another review. The only thing that would trigger another review is a significant change in use in this region, right? It's something that would cause a really great winter. So we have a lot of people who stay all winter and ski all winter. So we have a lot more occupancy than we've had in the last couple. That kind of trend might change the SFE volume with DEQ.
More year-round residents
Sure.
up there as well.
so one of the cool things, and it's really quick math, is we took the SFE count and the flow, and you can get your flow agreement pretty quick. So I did independent based off of the flumes out of the water usage and all the time and effort that Ron and everybody put into it. I did this independently. I came up with the same numbers, 60. So right now they're at 1,063 SFEs that they've used. You take that number and I'm 103% in correctness on the map. And we did the same thing on the plant side in the district, took the flow and the SFEs and can do that math. So because they're flow based and we measure their flow, we can use a dedicated number to project SFEs. And as you said, it's kind of loose, but we can come back based off of those flow measurements and adjust. So let's say today it's 60, but 5 years from now with growth and stuff, it gets closer to 70 or 75, then you can make that adjustment and say, okay, here's your standard deviated flow for this section. And you can calculate that and dial it in.
Didn't we remove everything on the section 3, 4, 9, and 10 take that out of the district on Exhibit F? We did that a couple of years ago. That area down there.
We redid the map, yes.
We did the map, and so basically, John, all you have left is whatever's in 33 and 32. And you're saying that you got 40% of your development left that's going to take place there. There's nothing else that can be annexed, essentially.
No, that is correct. There's a small section of 31 that's also on Spanish Peaks property that we've included in this. But you are correct. The only areas that we would be asking for the additional density is section 31, 32, and 33. And the section 31, we may never have anything in there. I don't know. That's
the
really
funky. It's the nose.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's a pretty safe bet here, I guess, that you have 40% of your development left happening in that particular area. There's no other additional land annex, and we're just going to base everything off of whatever the numbers are at the time, which we're shooting for 75 point whatever, and we're gonna monitor it over every 3 years and just try to make our best guess. And when you bring new subdivisions to our attention, we'll make decisions based off of that.
What's 31 cover, the bottom of Southern Comfort?
No, 31's the top of Southern Comfort, except where the Big Sky Resorts restaurant is
Oh,
and the top, yeah. I mean, and that is included in our master plan. We do have in our ODP with Madison County, there is some density up there. You never say never, but right now we don't have a whole lot of appetite for rental infrastructure up there.
and the
Things can change.
32 would include then Deep South,
32 is
all that's
yeah,
in between Deep South.
the base of Southern Comfort, yeah. That little section of, I don't even know what color, but where Johnny's Handies, that is already, that's Madison County Phase 3. That's already developed, and because we weren't in the district, those are on drain fields. So that's the other option here, that if, the annexation doesn't go through, we'll just build a treatment plant. I mean, that's our only alternative, right? And I don't think any of us really wants to see another treatment plant, another pond in Big Sky, but I mean, that would be the alternative if for some reason this annexation doesn't go through, so.
Well, how do we make a motion?
I think I would love to hear you have some discussion about whether you want to go for an election or you want to do it by ordinance, so I can get a feel for that. So anybody have any thoughts?
I second that pitch.
You're like, no, just so you know.
I'd love to go by ordinance versus an election.
Al's nodding his head. I don't know what that means.
Well, I'm gonna say what it means. I think I already played my card a little bit in the question that I asked. I mean, one of the things that's heavily leaning me in that direction is the fact that we have an obligation already. So if we meet the terms of, I guess I'll call that, I guess it's not really even an exception to going out to a vote. It's permitted. And we're talking about a customer, I'll call it, that we already have an obligation to provide. So it seems like there are a lot of reasons to do this. I guess I'd want to hear the reasons not to do it, if anyone has those, but it seems like it makes a lot of sense, and I think it's justifiable. And it sounds like even through the annexation by ordinance process, there's the opportunity for community to give feedback to that. So, it's not even limited to just this discussion. It's if someone were to say, here's the reason. I don't agree with that logic, Al, that yes, you have that obligation anyway, but what would be the reasons we have that opportunity to still hear? So that's where I'm leaning. And if I hear something differently now, that could persuade me, but why wouldn't we take that approach?
Al, I'm going to make a comment on that. That's a really good point. First and foremost, it's good to have this on the table today, but we have to remember that we will have to consider a number of annexation requests, and they have different conditions, they have different obligations, and they have different interpretations. I think that this in particular is more about a geographic boundary, and I'd ask Susan if the condition that you have excess capacity, is that geared towards a property that would like to annex and doesn't have an obligation for SFEs or a commitment for SFEs?
Yes.
Okay, so I'm gonna delineate these and try to just clear it up. So I see Spanish Peaks as being in a box, and it seems to have all the conditions to move forward for a geographic boundary. But then we have Firelight, which does not have an obligation. The district does not have a commitment. And that's a completely different condition on both capacity and on the consideration. We all know that we'll see coal smoke coming through right after this. That will have obligation and commitment and becomes again a geographic boundary. So as we do this, I just want to make sure we don't make a decision on one property without considering what's coming down the pipeline. And also that when you put this out for a vote, this is about as complicated as you get in a lot of ways. In fact, I was just looking at the exhibit for the area. We have commitment areas for service, we have district boundaries, different things that go into those as far as taxing and so on. That's a complicated deal. And that would be a hard thing, I think, on a vote to put out and go through all the checklists, but that's just my thought. So we have to consider the differences that will go along with each one of these applications moving forward. And Susan did a great job with the legal opinion, kind of put it right back in her lap and said, hey, you guys, it's up to you. You can do this or this. But as you said, Al, I think the idea that the board has the option is based on that summary of there are some nuances that could be complicated, and that would be in the best interest of the board to make the decision. That's kind of my summary, if that helps at all.
Well, also, we talked a lot about sewer, but we haven't talked about water. You're supplying the water anyway, so this is really just a sewer exclusive annexation.
Yeah, water is not part of this agreement whatsoever.
That's a great point, Mike, because again, other properties won't supply the water. So each one of these is going to be complicated, and a lot of boxes are checked in this one. That's all I'd say.
I think I'd like to tag on to what Brian said, my brain. Looking at what's coming down the road, it seems to me that the community should be given the opportunity to get involved. And that's why I'm leaning toward a vote on probably all of these. But as Al said, that runs up against a legal obligation. And I don't know what you would do if the community would vote against it in face of what the agreement is back 2000.
2000.
Yeah. So that's a good point you brought up.
Well, I think John addressed that somewhat, is that you guys could proceed with your development using drain fields.
Or not necessarily drain fields. I mean, I hope we would put drain fields all over the mountain. It would probably be more somebody else on a treatment plant, and then, you know, rather than, we would have to dispose of that rather than taking additional effluent from the district. We would use that probably for our phase 2 snowmaking.
Feels like the Canyon District is a prime example of not wanting to see another treatment facility in Big Sky. So trying to head down that road and suggest you go on your own just really add up with our general, philosophy from my view.
And I would suggest for this one as well, the advantage of going with an ordinance and not calling for an election would be that we get that annexation agreement that cleans up a number of the items out of a almost 25-year-old contract. So you gotta give the contract a lot of credit. It survived a quarter of a century. I don't think anybody anticipated it would take a quarter of a century, but I mean, that is also an advantage just for this one to say. But I appreciate Brian's comment that you're going to get more, and they're coming in sequentially. So you're going to be starting to look at what point do you start drawing lines that say, okay, well, this one needs to go out, and this one, because it has all of these components, doesn't.
One other point I'd make, I'm a bit concerned with an unintended consequence. And I guess I'd ask John Olson, if for some reason this failed at an election or that route, then I'm assuming you would still develop that property and you would go ahead with a plant. Then what happens to the obligation? Does this just increase density within the area and the concurrency issues that we face in the canyon, with the traffic and so on? That's a question. I'd hate to make a decision that would actually increase the density and the pressure.
I mean, maybe. I don't know. I mean, we have we have a current plan right now that we're building towards, and that plan spreads out all the density across all of the properties we have. Have we contemplated reducing some of the densities in one area and increasing them in another? Not really. Would we? Potentially. So I'm sorry, Brian, I know that's not the answer you're looking for, but you know, right now we have a plan, we're pursuing that plan, and at the end of the day, we would like to continue with that plan. That doesn't mean that things wouldn't change, you know, when this annexation doesn't go through. So I apologize, I can't answer that, but other than with.
I guess I'd rephrase it and I'd say this. I'm assuming you will develop this geographic area, correct?
Yes.
Regardless. Okay. So if for some reason that annexation failed, then the district could be faced with maintaining the obligation that's in place on the flow-based agreement, and also the increased density from your own plant. Is that a better way to say it?
Potentially.
Yeah.
I mean, for Brian, yes.
Yeah, I'm not trying to tie you into it. I just, that's the concern I would have, you know, one of the bigger concerns.
But you also are limited somewhat by your development.
We are bound by our ODP in Madison County and our MPUD in Galvin County. So no, we're not going to increase over those values.
Got it.
Our current development plan doesn't have us developing out to those values either. If we're forced, I shouldn't say forced, if the way this turns out that we are required to build our own treatment plant in Madison County, then yes, we may increase the density in Madison County up to what we're approved to offset the costs of building that treatment plant. So yes, Brian, to your point, if this annexation doesn't go through, it could create a scenario where we develop more density than we originally are anticipating.
Let me tag on to Brian's comment. And this goes to Susan. Can we incorporate in what you're going to draw out a stipulation that this does not set a precedent for other ones coming down the road with different circumstances regarding the pools, existing pools, legal agreements, et cetera?
Yes.
Each will be decided on its own merits. Is that kind of where you're heading, Brian?
Yes, Dick. You know, what I'm trying to do is basically tie up the growth. In other words, we put it all in a box. And I get it, the gallons based and the SFEs are difficult to do that with, but basically bring closure to a number of issues that are outstanding right now on growth and density. And I don't believe we will be held by precedent. I know that's always a difficult word, but I don't believe we'll be held by precedent because of the different nuances of these obligations and commitments for the district.
But for this ordinance, we can write in all of these factors you've been discussing to be able to say, these are, and we always do, right? Like the whole point of you having these discussions is to be able to put in the documentation and the minutes what you were basing your thought process on, so that you can go back when you look at the next one and you can say, well, but there's a difference here.
Okay.
You know, I'm going to I'll put it on the table real quick. And that's, you know, Housing Trust is going to come in. We're going to give them the fast lane, you know, or they probably have a better chance of getting this through if it does go out to a vote. And it's interesting, the pressure's on to make sure that there's some continuity in how we put that out. That's really important.
Pragmatic question, what is the approximate cost of an election? Where does that fall in our budgetary category?
And this is just an estimate. The election would probably run between 5,000 and 10,000 for us.
Okay. And where does that fall? Where does that come out? Just operating expenses?
Yeah, operating expenses. And we didn't budget for it this fiscal year, so.
And with primary election.
And we didn't budget for 3 of them.
No.
Now, I guess the counter argument would be for $5,000 to $10,000. I don't think that really weighs the decision significantly
It's not.
versus community input if we thought that was Christian.
It's not the amount that
You will land on an ordinance. Feels like we kind of.
It sounded like you landed on an ordinance and I think, but I haven't gotten it. So definitely there'd be a motion to proceed with ordinance, but then you still need to decide if you're going to proceed with ordinance, if you want to include an election after you pass the ordinance.
So making a motion at this point might help us get somewhere.
Quite possibly.
What Susan just suggested, it's kind of kicking the can down the road. But we could keep that option open up through the second reading.
Well, through the first reading, if you could change your mind at the first reading and decide to add, you want to call for an election at the first reading, that would then necessitate a change in the ordinance and 2 more readings of the changed ordinance. But yeah, you can kick the can.
And just.
It's a tough term.
Your comment, this essentially by going through ordinance process. Our ratepayers have the opportunity to weigh in on this over a period of several months and provide feedback, and we can adapt to that and not choose to adopt the ordinance should we receive negative feedback or counter feedback.
Okay, so let me take a shot here. I'll make a motion to approve annexation by ordinance. Period.
That's it?
That's it.
Okay, well, let's go to a second for discussion. Al, that's about as tight as you get.
We have to address the negotiations in this motion or no? Is it just straight, we're just approving the annexation, then that triggers all the next steps you outlined?
I think you better get a second, and then if you want to.
Yeah, go into discussion.
Have it as part of discussion, yeah.
Sorry.
Give me a second.
I'll second, go ahead.
Okay, so we have a motion, we have a second, we're in discussion. All right, Al, that's as tight as you get, so let's talk about what the intention is.
Well,
That we just get the ordinance so that we can take it to the next step, is that what I'm hearing?
I think that's showing our intention of where we're headed. We have the opportunity through that process to hear from the community. And again, I said it earlier, I welcome feedback as to where the parameters that we've just discussed, where we're not considering something that would require it to go to election, but everything's pushing me toward, this is an obligation we have. And it's contiguous land, so it meets all the requirements of the law. Why add challenge to this process? If Susan thinks we need to add what Mike asked, I'm open to that concept, but I don't know if your legal recommendation is enough to follow that, or if it needs to be part of that.
I'd like board direction. I do think if you're gonna go by ordinance, that an annexation agreement simultaneously will help educate everybody and solidify a lot of items. So it might make the conversation at the first reading easier because people would have more clarity on details, just rather than we're annexing this property.
Fair enough.
I'd say, I like the idea that it's such a tight motion for this reason. I'd like to see the ordinance that, the rough draft of it. I'd like to hear from Terry on some of the topics that he'd like to address in the negotiation. And I'd like the board to be able to identify closure on all those items that we've talked about moving forward. So we'd have a better idea if that's something that should go to a vote or not, but it'd be nice to know what the entire package is that we're putting out there that we're going to be discussing. Does that make sense?
Does.
Yeah. But I think this is just the first baby step, and that's what you had said, Susan. You got to take this one step at a time.
Does this annexation though have any effect on the community? Or like I said, if I'm understanding it right, we're using the same SFEs, the same agreement we already have, it's just over more acres. So does it change anything for the community to have like this hurts the community in any fashion or?
Well, I think what we discussed about the increase in density, perhaps the counter
The counter.
could adversely impact.
Okay, yeah.
Demand on services of all types.
But going forward with it doesn't change anything really.
Scott? Jared's question, I mean, anything technically in this that you see that changes the calculus?
As long as you open it to their flow based agreement. As far as wastewater, there's no impact, but. As we start policing that. Then we can follow the annexation agreement to. Talk about penalties if you did exceed that, because you can't really have.
I'd clarify when you say the community perspective, you say, is it the community perspective or the customer ratepayer perspective? I think from a ratepayer perspective, it's the same obligation, same gallons-based agreement, flow-based agreement. Community's perspective, then it gets into a little different discussion.
Well, that really gets us into the kind of the conundrum we have in this community. Is that there isn't any kind of a central. I don't want to say authority, but any kind of a central overlook of what different developments and things do for the community. We rely on 2 distant counties to make those decisions. But in a sense, that's not our responsibility or charter. But it really is, because nobody else is doing it. And that's something I've struggled with for over 20 years now. What is our charter and what things are within our legitimate, I want to, authority is too strict, but we don't have to have authority to say, no, we don't like this. We just say we don't like it. So I'm just viewing or venting as kind of a frustration with Big Sky. That who makes these decisions that lead to traffic jams on 64 and more traffic jams with another traffic light. And on. That's just a throwaway.
Dick, I think that's starting to gain traction. We had the meeting last night with the coordinating council, so the entities that being are really starting to come together to project that one voice, especially with Bizrad and stuff. And then since I've been here, I've constantly heard from the entities, the desire for one district, not multiple districts.
Yes.
So I think with us leading that charge of, hey, let's get uniformity and consistency throughout the district, we start laying that groundwork. No, we're not keepers of traffic and all that stuff, but we get a bigger voice to the counties involved and can influence that. And I think the groundwork is starting to be laid to get that input from the counties to help address some of those outlying needs that a incorporated community would have that we go.
The only thing I would say to that, Johnny, is, it's compartmentalized planning. And each one of these districts or authorities has a responsibility. And you have great leadership in the fire district. And although sometimes the traffic seems a little tough with MDOT, they do have the governing authority to manage that through their approval process. And this is our approval process. And, there's no guarantee, I think, that Spanish Peaks can achieve some of these goals with those other governing bodies, just not ours. Ours is about the ratepayers and customers.
Yeah.
It's just unique, and it's not kicking the can, as Susan was saying. It was, which is fine. But there are authorities out there. I have faith in Dustin, and
Yep.
Yeah. It's unique. It's a unique community. It's a geographic location, not a municipality.
So after listening to the discussion on my motion, I'd propose an amendment to that succinct motion to include the language that Susan suggested in her memo. Start the lengthy sentence you referred to, Dick, that starts with that we direct staff to work with the applicant. I guess I'll read the whole thing. Work with the applicant, to reach an annexation agreement which acknowledges the district obligations to provide service under the agreement, the number of SFEs currently approved, the mathematics of the various volume for SFE that is approved by MDEQ, the flow monitoring which exists, and additional monitoring and period of reporting of flow and an acceptable variation rate, recognize peak flows and low flows in light of the agreement and plant capacity, period.
So that's your amendment. Do we have the second to support that?
Well, second.
Okay.
You take back his concise.
Yeah. Yeah, I tried. No, I mean, I understand what you're saying. We need to keep things moving, and I think that not only shows where we're headed, but keeps the work flowing in that process.
As I understand it, if this motion with the amendment passes, then we'll bring back an ordinance and an annexation agreement for the board to either read or amend.
Yep. This is progress. I mean, it's progress without closure, but it's progress.
Continue to refine the agreement.
Yeah, no, I think this is great. This is a great first step. I mean, obviously, the devil's gonna be in the details of the annexation agreement, right? But I think this is great. This, you know, I agree. I mean, I'm happy with the outcome. I'm hoping that we can do this by ordinance and without going to an election. But we'll just, again, we'll figure out the nuts and bolts when they negotiate the annexation agreement.
We haven't voted yet.
Yeah. Good point. All right. Any other discussion on it? I'll call the question. All in favor? Oppose? Motion carries unanimously. It's a good first step. Really nice job, Susan, on that, on your opinion and summary. It was very helpful with this today.
I know I'm working at the pace slower than glaciers are melting, but it's okay.
I got a torch.
He's got the key right there, I'll tell you. I don't know if you need me for legal under C and C1. I don't know.
No, that was it.
Okay.
We don't have any other legal items.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, John.
Thanks, Susan.
I'd like to just throw something out. I saw in the paper this morning.
Okay.
Boeing has what down, Brian, 1,011 rooms for employees.
And that was, well, I won't say rooms, that's pillows. I don't want to overstate it. It's pillows.
Yeah, beds.
But it's that was great coverage this morning in the paper.
And am I right, those all use SFEs from the Boeing pool?
They were not from the housing trust. And they were on their land. So on Boyne land, Boyne SFEs.
I won't belabor the contrast.
Permits. 3 permits were submitted, been slow. Remodeling Cascade, a new house on Cascade, and then 3 Yellowtail duplexes, the Yellowtail residences here in the middle.
Dick, I did send you the breakdown of the SFE pool.
Yes, yeah.
Is that what you were looking for? Yeah.
Thank you.
The Yellowtail one wasn't signed, wasn't there employee housing component to theirs as well? And has that gone through the appropriate process, or is this just a fraction they're gonna develop?
Yeah, this is just a fraction, and they are slated for 10 SFEs for with the housing trust, and when they submit that, they submit that.
So that's not, it's not part of the package, hasn't been approved, and they haven't gone to the council trust, as we know of today.
Yep.
Okay.
And I'll work with those guys,
Yeah.
if you wanna see that break down.
Nope, I'm good, I'm just curious, I did, that one looks different, so I asked it.
No,
And that one's not an annexation, that one was already.
Fair enough.
So. Next meeting, September 17th. Wow, we are done.
10:45, that was like, you're gonna have lunch today.
Now,
I
it's
had
getting
it.
comfortable.
Everybody's good with September 17th. Need a adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second?
Hey, Brian?